Hello everyone, this is Dr. R.T. Mullins. I'm sorry that I cannot be there with you in person, but I'm glad that I can at least present this talk in this format. This is because I think that the relationship between religion and reason is very important. Humans are rational animals. They're capable of responding to reasons and arguments. But don't you think that's kind of odd? Out of all of the possible creatures that the evolutionary process could have produced, why does it produce rational animals like humans? Let me put the question in a different way. Here's the question that's been bothering me lately. Why are we living in a world like this? Out of all of the possible universes, why this universe? Why a universe with rational animals that are capable of pondering philosophical questions, weighing moral considerations for various actions, and capable of creating great works of beauty? Why a universe like this? I believe that I have a partial answer to this question. My partial answer is that a perfectly rational God created this universe for a series of reasons. One of the most central reasons or purposes that God has for creating a universe is to enter into friendship with human persons. What I want to do in this talk is paint in broad strokes. I want to discuss the general features of the kind of universe that God would create in order to satisfy his desire to enter into friendship with human persons. So my claim is this: God has created humans with the goal of entering into genuine friendship with them. Brian Leftow offers some reflections on friendship with God and human freedom. He starts by noting that God desires to be friends with humans in the Bible. So, for example, Exodus 3:11, Isaiah 41:8, and Job 29:4. Then, what Leftow does is he asks, how can God bring about friendship? Leftow makes a fairly common claim. Friendship requires freedom. He says that most friendships begin in some kind of involuntary attraction, but that people choose whether or not to continue the relationship in turn to get into a genuine friendship. So here's what he says. So here's Leftow. He says, friendship is a deliberately pursued project, for we seek our friends' company, seek to know them better, to further their interests, and to keep ourselves attractive to them. Further, we commit ourselves to our friends. Fair weather friends are not true friends. A true friend is someone you can count on. A true friend is committed to stand by us and help us in times of trouble, and will, if the time comes to choose, to honor that commitment. The emphasis on freedom is important here for Leftow. Leftow says, genuine commitment cannot be coerced, nor can the rest of friendship. We can be forced to act friendly, but we cannot be forced into genuine friendship. In fact, attempts to force us may make us cease even to like the person coercing us. So here's what I'm thinking. If God's most central purpose in creating this universe is to enter into a genuine friendship with humans, then God cannot coerce that friendship. Coercion breeds all manner of bad emotions and beliefs that lead to broken relationships. For example, coercion can lead to the coerced to feel resentment, fear, and hatred towards the one that's manipulating them. Any positive emotions would seem to be the result of brainwashing or Stockholm Syndrome. That's not a genuine friendship. According to Leftow, God's perfect love places constraints on how God can bring about genuine friendship with humanity. He says, if God gave creatures natures which guaranteed that they would love, trust, and commit to him, this would be relevantly like brainwashing or coercion. Our response would ultimately come from God, not us. God would frustrate his goal of befriending us. So God can befriend us only by giving us natures which leave us free to reject this friendship. Because God imposes our natures on us, if God genuinely wants to be friends, he must impose natures which leave us free to reject this friendship. So that's what Leftow says. Now, in light of this, one can start to think about the kind of universe that God needs to create in order to provide the opportunity for genuine divine human friendship. So again, my claim is that God's most central purpose for creating the universe is to enter into friendship with as many humans as possible. If God is going to satisfy that goal, that desire, then God must select a particular kind of universe. Because not just any old universe will do. It needs to be a universe where self-conscious life is not only possible, but inevitable. This significantly narrows down the range of universes that God might create. What kind of universe can satisfy all of that? I mean, to be honest, I don't really know for certain. My guess is that lots of different kinds of universes can do all of that. But I can discuss some of the general features that a universe must have if it's going to be a potential candidate for creation. I'll call this range of universes friendly universes, because they are universes with creatures that can enter into genuine friendship with God. My guess is that the range of friendly universes is quite large, though not as large as the range of all possible universes. So what I want to do is discuss some of the general features of friendly universes. To start, a general feature of a friendly universe is that it contains creatures that can possibly enter into friendship with God. These kinds of creatures are persons. Keeping in mind God's most central purpose, William Hasker says that it's good that there should be free, rational, and responsible persons. It is good that persons should have occasion and opportunity to exercise their inherent powers and potentialities in order to develop an individual character. Hasker also says that it is good that persons be joined together into families and communities in which persons are responsible to and for each other. This allows for more opportunities for created persons to develop their individual character in greater and in morally significant ways. And then finally, Hasker says that it's good that the structures and processes of human societies develop from within, utilizing the powers, the potential, and the ingenuity of the members of those societies, rather than having those structures being imposed on society by God. Well, what kind of universe would God need to create in order for these goods to be possible? Hasker says that we should expect God to create a particular kind of universe with stable laws of nature that allow for a variety of creatures with varying degrees of complexity, flexibility, and autonomy. The complexity of creatures ranges from simple atoms to rational animals. The kind of autonomy in view here is the freedom of an entity to operate according to its inherent capabilities, without direct control or interference from God. According to Hasker, it's a great good that God should create a universe with component systems that are able to evolve from within by utilizing its inherent powers and potentialities. This is the kind of natural universe that one would expect God to create, in order to satisfy various divine purposes in general, but also to satisfy God's most central purpose of entering into friendship with humans. This is because the kind of natural universe needed in order to make it possible for created persons with significant freedom to exist. Now, whatever else a friendly universe might include, it needs to be a universe with stable laws of nature that allow for complexity and autonomy. This is a universe in which God will fully determine the initial conditions of the universe so as to endow it with certain powers and structure that will give rise to the kind of values or goods that he wants from creation. This fully determinate set of initial conditions grounds the possible timelines that could subsequently follow. So there's something that I call God's pre-creation moment. This is the moment where God exists all alone prior to even deciding to create a universe. Now, branching from this pre-creation moment are all of the possible timelines, all of the possible ways that the future might unfold. When God selects to create a universe, many possible timelines become no longer possible. When God fully determines the initial conditions of the universe, even more possible timelines are eliminated from being realized. Yet there are still a great many possible futures branching from this initial creative act. Some of these possible futures are good timelines, and some are, well, they're dark timelines. A good timeline is a possible future in which God's most central purpose is realized. A dark timeline is a possible future in which God's most central purpose, well, it fails to be realized. Given that God is perfectly good and perfectly rational, God's going to seek to eliminate dark timelines from possibly becoming actual. God can eliminate certain dark timelines by selecting good initial conditions for the universe. For example, there's the much-discussed fine-tuning of the universe. These discussions reveal that there are many ways that the universe could go wrong in the moments shortly after the Big Bang. On some scenarios, the universe could have collapsed in on itself, thus making biological life impossible. On other scenarios, the universe could have expanded at the wrong rate, which again makes biological life impossible. If biological life became impossible shortly after the Big Bang, then God's most central purpose of entering into friendship with humans, that's just going to fail to be realized. So what God's going to do is he's going to select favorable initial conditions that would prevent these dark timelines from occurring. Now, as Hasker and others point out, a universe with natural laws and created persons with freedom, it involves various risks. Stable natural laws bring with them the risk of natural disasters occurring. And creatures with significant moral freedom, well, that brings with them the risk of immoral actions. And discussions of these matters, it's commonplace in theology and philosophy of religion. Though the details of the actual biological laws needed to pull it off, those are usually pretty scarce. In a different paper, Emanuela Sani and I, she's a molecular biologist, what we did is we discussed the potential for God to use redundancies, risk management systems, and surveillance systems in the molecular biological order to lower various risks in order to guarantee the success of God's most central purposes. So what we did is we gave the details of the kind of biological laws that one should expect God to put in place. But in order to keep this relatively short, I'll just ask you, if you're interested, to go check out the details of that paper. Here, I'm just going to focus on other features of a friendly universe. If one of God's goals is to create human persons who can enter into genuine friendship with God, then God will need to ensure that humans have a certain set of cognitive equipment that's primed for friendship. I've already stated that freedom is essential to friendship, yet there are certain other cognitive powers that are needed in order to make possible genuine relationships between God and humans, in order to ensure that dark timelines are eliminated. A standard package of cognitive mechanisms will also include the powers of rationality, emotion, empathy, and a theory of mind. Let me start with a theory of mind. This is the ability to recognize other minds. The theory of mind has been discussed in a lot of the literature on psychology and philosophy of religion. Alvin Plantinga has famously extended the theory of mind to a faculty for an innate awareness of God that he calls the sensus divinitatis, or a sense of the divine. Endowing humans with a faculty like that, that's going to help eliminate dark timelines, because without that faculty, humans would be unable to be aware of God. Yet simply recognizing other minds like God, that's not going to be enough to ensure the success of God's most central purpose. Humans endowed with the ability to recognize other minds and perform free actions, that's not sufficient for accepting God's offer of friendship. In order to enter into genuine relationships, creatures will need to have the cognitive powers of rationality and emotion. These cognitive powers are said to enable people to share ideas, take responsibility for their actions, and develop trust and cooperation. All of that is important for friendship. Rationality and emotion, they go hand in hand. The power of rationality is the ability to be responsive to reasons for acting. There are different kinds of roles that reasons play in our free actions, such as justifying, motivating, and explaining the actions of an agent. Often reasons for acting are values or disvalues in a given situation. Emotions play a crucial role in helping agents identify reasons for action because emotions involve evaluations. Now, emotions, as I understand it, emotions are felt evaluations of situations that involve perceiving various values or disvalues in a given circumstance. When one has an emotion, one is perceiving the value of the object of her emotion to be an object that is worthy of her attention and worthy of her action. Thus, there's a close connection between the emotional evaluations and acting for a reason. If an emotional response fails to properly track the value of an object, the emotional response is not rational. If an emotional response properly tracks the value of the object, the emotional response is rational. God endowing humans with these cognitive powers is a great example of a risk management system built into the psychology of human nature. God is the supreme object of value. By endowing humans with the cognitive powers of reason and emotion, God has enabled humans to be capable of recognizing God's value and appropriately respond to God's value, thus enabling humans to accept God's offer of friendship. If humans lacked these cognitive powers, they would be unable to accept God's offer of friendship, and God's most central purpose, it would fail. So along with a theory of mind, rationality, and emotion, humans will need the capacity for empathy in order to enter into friendship with God. The capacity for empathy is a person's ability to understand what it is like for another person to feel the way that they do. In empathizing with others, a person comes to know what others care about and their reasons for acting as they do. Empathy plays a large role in the development of genuine relationships. And this is so for at least two reasons. First, individuals with a reduced capacity for empathy, they also have a reduced capacity to form attachments to others. So the higher the capacity for empathy, the higher the capacity to form attachments and genuine friendship. And then second, human persons, they naturally want to be understood because there's a kind of loneliness that comes when others cannot understand why you are feeling the way that you do. This is because humans do not bond with people who do not understand them, whereas humans, they do bond with people who do empathetically understand them. The natural human desire to be understood can draw creatures to seek out the maximally empathetic God. By endowing human persons with these cognitive powers, God has ensured that humans are primed to genuinely accept his offer of friendship. Thus, God is able to eliminate a large number of dark timelines in which his most central purpose fails. Now, earlier I mentioned that there are certain risks in creating a natural world with free creatures. And many philosophers argue that creating a universe like this, it's necessary in order to make God's most central purpose possible. A common claim is that if God wants humans to be in a genuine relationship with him, then humans must have a particular kind of virtuous character. Good friendships are based on shared interests and mutual trust. If God desires to have friendship with humans, then God desires that humans be trustworthy. The question becomes what kind of universe is required for humans to develop the requisite moral character for friendship with God. I want to point out two further features of a friendly universe: epistemic distance and the possibility for suffering. Let me start with epistemic distance. So epistemic distance basically means that some particular item of knowledge is not immediately or overwhelmingly obvious. The case of interest here is the existence and nature of God. God cannot make his own existence and presence overwhelmingly obvious. Why? Well, if humans were immediately aware of the full presence of God, they would never freely develop their moral character. So think about it this way. So when I was 15 years old, I went to this Christian youth convention, and for whatever reason that year, the speakers had decided on a certain set of slogans to just repeat over and over and over. One slogan went something like this: "Don't do anything that you would not do if Jesus Christ were in the room with you." That was the slogan. Now, if I remember correctly, the slogan had the goal of persuading teenagers to avoid pornography. And maybe it helped teenagers with that. I don't know. I'm really not sure. For me, my mind immediately went somewhere else. I started thinking of all the things that I would not do if Jesus walked in the room. For some reason, my first thought was that I would not watch TV. I mean, something just seems impolite about watching TV when a guest has just arrived, especially if that guest is Jesus Christ. Then I started thinking about other cases. At some point, I'll need to go to the bathroom. I'm not going to feel comfortable doing that if Jesus is standing there. And then, of course, me being 15 years old, I started to think about when I'm married. There are certain morally permissible things to do on my wedding night, and I most certainly would not want to do any of that if Jesus is standing there. So in my 15-year-old mind, I decided that this slogan could not be a good moral principle to live by. And as an adult, I still think that's right. I still think that's correct. If humans are born with an immediate and innate awareness of the full presence of God, they will not be able to freely develop into the kind of virtuous beings that God wants them to be. Notice that this is not inconsistent with God implanting in humans a sensus divinitatis. The claim that I'm making is that there needs to be some sort of epistemic distance between God and humans, such that humans are not immediately and perpetually aware of the full presence of God. Leftow says that God cannot overwhelmingly bias our nature toward friendship. If my response to God is 95% implanted in me by God, then I am 95% brainwashed by God. So God can implant in us, he can put in us the sensus divinitatis and provide evidence for his existence in nature in all sorts of different ways. But God needs to be careful not to coerce our friendship with him. So here's what Leftow says. He explains this. He says, "Thus God has a tightrope to walk. The more God biases our nature towards him, the less genuine our friendship. Yet if God were to bias our natures against friendship, then the less likely our friendship would be." So here's what Leftow's thinking. he says that God must find some sort of optimum balance where God does not overwhelm us nor coerce our friendship. And Leftow says he doesn't know what that optimum balance is, and I don't know either. Leftow suggests that whatever that balance is, it probably is a slight bias towards friendship with God, but not too much. A slight balance towards God leaves it as robustly possible that a large number of people will reject God's offer of friendship. And here's a quote from Leftow. He says, "Because of what friendship is and God's position as our creator, if God seeks our friendship, we should expect him to endure a good deal of rejection," which is, of course, what we see. So what I'm thinking is that one feature of a friendly universe is epistemic distance. Here's the final feature of a friendly universe that I want to talk about today, and that's the possibility of suffering. I should note an irony here in calling such a universe a friendly universe, because, again, a friendly universe is one in which genuine friendship with God is possible. And I'm going to admit, it sounds strange to say that a friendly universe must include the possibility of suffering, but look, here we are. A common claim from theologians and philosophers is that God must place creatures in an environment where they can genuinely develop their moral character through a long series of significantly weighty moral choices. This involves an environment where there is the real possibility of harm, pain, and suffering. A famous example of this line of thought comes from John Hick's so-called soul-building theodicy. For Hick, God must create a universe with real consequences for human actions. Otherwise, humans cannot develop a moral character. So here's what Hick says. This is a quote. He says, "A world in which there can be no pain or suffering would also be one in which there can be no moral choices, and hence no possibility of moral growth and development. For in a situation in which no one can ever suffer injury, or be liable to pain or suffering, there would be no distinction between right and wrong action. No action would be morally wrong because no action could have harmful consequences. And likewise, no action would be morally right in contrast to wrong. Whatever values of such a world, it clearly could not serve a purpose of the development of its inhabitants from self-regarding animality to self-giving love." So philosophers like Hick and Richard Swinburne, they both argue that a universe with the possibility of real harm is required in order to bring about the great goods of soul-making and friendship with God. The possibility of suffering makes possible greater goods like genuine freedom and moral development, sympathy and compassion, and a whole lot of other things. The actual development of human moral character into virtuous people, it's a prerequisite for a deep and abiding friendship with God. So, as odd as it sounds, a general feature of a friendly universe is that it includes the possibility of suffering. I take these to be the general features of a friendly universe, and I assume that there are probably other features of friendly universes that I've missed. And I know of other features that I am just ignoring for the sake of brevity. What I do is I'm going to ask others to think about these issues more deeply, and perhaps one day we can come up with a more detailed account together.